Okay, so here's the one that I made last night with the same technique, testing all of this out, and here's the one that I made with y'all today. But this is what this would look like once you have it all set up, and we're going to build this together using a website called photop.com, which is a free Photoshop duplicate. Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. I'm Hey Shady Lady, and today we're going to be doing a hopefully super quick tutorial on how to make a pretty basic overlay for your Twitch streams using a free website called Photop and free resources like pexels.com and pixabay.com to get stock images to make your graphics. Hopefully by the end of this video, we will make an overlay that looks very similar to this one, if not the exact same, and you will learn some new techniques and how you can make an overlay that looks similar to this. So this is what the actual graphic looks like when it's not in overlay mode, but the gray areas of this are transparent. And we're going to build this together using a website called photop.com, which is a free Photoshop duplicate. I've used Photoshop since I was 15, so like 15 years, and this is a almost perfect duplicate. The only complaint I have as a Photoshop user is the keyboard controls aren't the exact same, but other than that, you're going to be able to make the same stuff that you would be able to in an Adobe program, but it's totally free. And you can even export files on this as PSD files if you wanted to pull it into Photoshop at a different point. We will also be using another free resource called pixabay.com, which is a website that you can use to get free, royalty-free stock images that you can use for all kinds, so many different things. I mean, you could even make a whole Instagram queue out of just these pictures and maybe some like crafty text overlays and stuff. But for today, we're just going to be making an overlay. So I have already gone through and picked out a couple of images that I thought would be good for this. So you can see some of the ones I've chosen here, and you can play around with any number of these. We're going to begin by creating a new project in Photop first. We need this to be 1920 by 1080 up here in the upper left corner over here, and make the background transparent and do create, and that will give us our new document. Another area of this that I want to familiarize you with really quick is right above my head, and it's the layers. We're going to be using layers a lot. First of all, I want to familiarize you with, let me zoom in a little bit here so you can see what I am working with. So this little lock right here usually shows up when you start a new project. You just want to click off that lock. Lock just means that it can't be manipulated, moved around, cropped, edited in any way. So you can always add a lock on if you're pretty satisfied with the layer, but we're going to keep that off because we need to work with this. We're just getting started. Another thing that would be useful for you to know is at the bottom of that down there is a couple of different buttons. So the one in particular that we're going to be interested in is this one right here, because we're going to use this quite a few times, and when you hover over it, it'll tell you that it says new layer. And you can see here when we click this new layer button, it's going to generate layer 1. And I'll continue to say make a new layer. When I do, it just means hit that button down there. Okay, so when we get started, we have our background layer fully transparent, and we are trying to make an overlay that you can have your gameplay come through and your webcam come through. This is a fairly basic type of overlay that I see most streamers using. I've been using myself for like 5 years. So we're just going to pick a nice background, whatever suits your fancy. It could be literally anything, whatever you think looks nice. There's definitely some advice as far as not too busy is the first thing I would say. This image looks a little busy, but we're gonna mess around with this. So I'm just gonna right click, copy it, and paste it into our file. You can see it doesn't fill up the full screen, which we definitely need it to. So we're going to go into edit, free transform, and that's going to give us the ability to click and drag this around. You want to hold the shift button while you click one of the corners so that it will remain in the original ratio or dimensions that this image was. And we're just gonna stretch that out so it fits the full thing. And we'll click this confirm button up at the top toolbar to say, yes, this is the size we want it to be. Now we have our base layer background. It is very busy and crisp and a lot going on. So the first thing I'm going to do is blur this out a little bit. And we're going to do this by coming into the top toolbar, filter up in the top middle, and we're going to choose blur, and my favorite is Gaussian blur. Feel free to play around with all of this stuff to your heart's content to learn how they work, but Gaussian blur, you can see, makes it very, very, very blurry, or we can do just a slight little blur. This is also nice if you want to crop yourself out of an image and blur the background a little bit and then put your cropped selfie back on top of it, it kind of gives that illusion of that special lens that photographers use to make the background blurred out. We're gonna blur this a pretty good amount. So right there looks decent to me, about 5 pixels, and we'll click OK. And then to give a little flavor and to teach y'all how to do this, I've picked a geometric background here that just has some texture to it. You could use any textured background that you like. Any of these kind of textured backgrounds would be interesting to play around with. A galaxy one would be great, anything at all. So if we just type in the word texture in this Pixabay search, you can see we've got a lot of interesting textures to play with right here. These watercolor ones would be a lot of fun, and you can see there's a lot of different textures in here that you can use. What we're going to do is we're going to bring this in, we're going to paste it on top. I know this looks weird, but we're going to go ahead and go back into the edit up here, free transform, so that we can stretch this out to fit as well. We'll hold the shift key while we stretch the corner, click the checkbox at the top to say yes, we're done. Now we're going to come in and we're going to mess with this image a little bit. So I'm going to go in the top toolbar, image, adjustments, and we're going to go into exposure, and I'm just going to try and mess with this contrast a little bit to try and make the lines a little more stark, kind of how I want them. And again, feel free to just kind of experiment and play with this stuff on your own so you get it how you want it to look. I'm also going to come into image, adjustments, and we're going to desaturate this. I don't want any of the colors, so we're going to come over here on the layer bar above my head. We're going to drop down this normal. This is giving us a bunch of options of how we can have these two layers blend on top of each other. And keep in mind, the layers, the way they work is when they are stacked on top of each other, the one on the top will have the effect going downwards. So let's change this to, let's just try a couple out. This is with overlay, not loving it. Soft light, not loving it. So I'm not loving any of these, which is fine. Experimentation. So let's grab a different one. This one looks like it could be interesting. So bring that in, paste it, transform it out to fit. And let's go ahead and just merge this down and see what this looks like. We're gonna try screen. So you can see this kind of adds the color palette to it. That's actually kind of interesting. I don't totally hate this. We're gonna stick with screen. I like how that looks. I like this rainbow effect. And we'll say this is pretty good. I would recommend waiting until the end of your project to merge layers unless it's totally necessary, but I'm gonna go ahead and teach you how to do this. We have decided that we like how this looks on top of these flower petals. So I want these two layers, when two become one, I want these two layers to merge into one. You wanna make sure that you have the top layer selected, and there are two ways that you can do this. You can come up into the layer toolbar at the top, and at the very bottom, there's an option that says merge down or Control E, and this is going to merge the two layers together. You can see that I only have one layer over here now. Or you can right click on the layer that you want to merge down, and at the very bottom you can see the option merge down, and it's going to merge those two together, and we have one layer now. Okay, so we have our main textured background. Now we need to go ahead and set up the shapes for the gameplay and the webcam. So here's where we're going to create a new layer. So either hit that button at the bottom corner, or you can do layer, new layer up at the top here. And we're going to select the rectangle tool, which is over here on the left toolbar. Now at the top of the bar, the top toolbar up here, we have a lot of different options for how we can make this rectangle look. We're going to go ahead and change the color to something, it doesn't matter what the color is right now because we're actually going to erase this space, but we're creating the shape. So I'm just going to make it a little bit nicer on my eyes for this process. Now starting on the left here, we have options between shape, path, pixels. We want to pick pixels. Shape is going to leave it having an outline around it that shows what dimension it is, and we don't necessarily need that. So we're going to drop it down to pixels, so it's just creating a pixel path. Anti-alias is fine. This section here that says free, fixed ratio, fixed size, we do want this to be a fixed ratio because we want to try to match what most video game dimensions are. And you can find this by just Googling what ratio is a video game. Super simple, and we know that it's 16 by 9. So we're going to come back over here up into that top. We're going to change the width to 16. We're going to change the height to 9. And now you can see that when we stretch this, no matter what, it stays in this same general ratio shape, which is pretty much what the shape of YouTube videos, all of that kind of stuff is. Now, for me personally, I prefer rounded corners. You can keep it super square if you want to, but we're going to go back up into that top toolbar and we're going to change the corner radius to about 20 pixels or so. And when we click and drag this, you can now see that my corners are slightly rounded. That's just a preferred aesthetic for me. Feel free to experiment on your own. You could even go up to like 100. I like to play around with this sometimes. I know we've got like super nice rounded corners. Now we're going to click and drag. We're going to start in the top left corner and we're going to click and drag however big you want your gameplay screen to be. Some people will go for about a size like this because they want to fit the chat box on the right with their username and some information underneath, and we want the webcam in the bottom right. If you want more of a focus on gameplay, then stretch it out a little bit bigger like there, but keep in mind you won't really have space for a chat box if you do this. So I'm gonna go like a nice little in between. I'm not gonna be too worried about a chat box on this one. So we're gonna go with about this size here. And if you feel like it's not positioned correctly, you can always come up to this on the left-hand toolbar, this little click and drag pointer, the arrow pointer up here, and you can just move this element around. Sometimes it will automatically snap to the edges. So if you find that you're trying to get like really in depth with the pixels, if you hold the control button down while you're clicking and dragging, it will not snap or automatically lock to the edges. So we're going to settle this right about here. That's going to be it for setting up the space for our gameplay. Next, we need to set up space for our webcam. So we're going to create another new layer, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to come back to the rectangle tool on the left-hand side. Let's change the color of this so we can see the difference in the two elements that we're working with. But again, keep in mind the color doesn't really matter. And we're going to decide what size we want our webcam to be. I would recommend making the corners not too rounded for your webcam if you decide to go with rounded corners, just because it's a little hard to crop your webcam properly all the time. So let's go ahead and set this up how we kind of feel we want our webcam to be. And I feel like this size looks pretty decent. So we're going to go with about this right here. This is what I call blocking the design out. So we know that we've got our gameplay in the black square. We've got our webcam going in the blue square. So from here, we're going to toggle the visibility of our webcam layer because we don't actually need to be working with it just yet. And you toggle the visibility by clicking the little eyeball next to the layer. And you can see that that turns that layer off and on. So we're going to keep that off because we're just working with the gameplay area right now. And what we're going to do next is we want to select all of the pixels that this takes up. We're not going to click on the name of the layer over here or the eyeball. We're going to hold down the control button while we click in this actual thumbnail of what the layer looks like. And when we do that, if you watch around the edges of the element, you're going to see that we have now selected only that space. Now we're going to toggle the visibility off of this element, and you can see we still have those same pixels selected. We're going to click onto our background layer, and then we're going to hit delete on our keyboard. Hold Control and hit D to deselect those pixels. And now you can see that we have a nice clean space for our gameplay to come through. Now I'd like to add a border to this, so we're going to double click the background layer over here, and it's going to pop up a layer style menu. There's a lot of things in here that you can play around with, but for now I'm just going to use the stroke here, and you can see that has already added a red outline in here. We're going to up those pixels to about 5. Now I'm going to do this with a really big number to show you what's happening here. I'm going to put this on 25 pixels, and you're going to see that the stroke is building inward. It's building in on top of where the gameplay is going to go. If we want this to not take up any more space of the gameplay screen, we can drop down this position box here and we can change it to inside instead. It's going to change the direction the stroke is facing. We can also center it in between both ways. So play around with that, figure out what you like. We are going to drop this down to about 5 pixels because I don't want a super large outline. I'm going to do the inside one so that it's not taking up any of our gameplay space. And we're going to change the color that this is filling with. Okay, so we're just going to move around and pick a color that we think kind of complements the whole look. You could just go like a solid black or a solid white if you want. I'm going to kind of play in these purpley reds to match the way that the flowers are already looking. So I'm going to click OK here. I might up this to about 10 pixels, and I'm going to try to change the blend mode of this stroke to see if we can get something more interesting looking. We also could have a little more fun with this, so let's up this to 25 pixels so y'all can see what's happening here again. And we're going to change the fill type down here at the bottom to a gradient instead of just a color. And you can see now that it gradients from black to white up at the top, but we can change that by actually clicking the gradient, clicking in this little box on the left side, changing the color over here. So let's try like this type of purple, and we'll have this fade to light. So again, I'm clicking on the square, and then I'm coming down here to choose the color, and we're going to go with kind of like a lighter blue, maybe like that. We'll click OK. So we have like a purple to blue gradient. We'll click OK on this. You can see what that's doing in the background. Again, I just upped the pixels so y'all could see what was happening. I'm going to drop that back down to 5 pixels. So it's just kind of like a subtle little effect you could add to the outline if you wanted to. And you can also change the scale and the axis that the gradient is actually on. Right now it's just on a straight line, but you could change the axis so that it's at a slant. if you preferred, which would just make it look a little more interesting. I didn't love how that previous gradient looked, so I just changed it to a light purple fading to a white instead, which is just a little more subtle. And just to give you guys an idea of what this is going to look like with gameplay under it, I'm just going to bring a screen cap of Stardew Valley into this. So this is how a game is going to look underneath this overlay. Now that we have the gameplay section set up, we can go ahead and delete this layer that we made that has the actual shape, because we don't need it anymore. Now we're going to move back into that blue layer that has our webcam. So we're going to bring on the visibility of the webcam element. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to hold control while we click on the thumbnail image of that layer so that it selects the pixels. We're going to click down into the background layer and we're going to hit delete on our keyboard. If we want to make sure that it worked, we can toggle the visibility off of that element, hold control, hit D to deselect the pixels. And now you can see that it's created an outline into this area, but we don't have an actual outline that finishes the shape off. So that's not good. So we're gonna hit Control Z a couple of times to undelete that section. We're gonna turn the visibility off, and now we're going to need to do something called rasterizing the layer. This is basically finalizing the layer and saying that we can flatten everything into one. We don't need the effects to be separate. So we're going to right click on the layer in question, and we're going to select rasterize layer style. It's not going to look like anything changed on the actual layer itself, but you can see, I'm going to Control Z back. You see how there's this little section that says effect. When we rasterize the layer, that effect goes away. So the stroke is no longer applying to it because it's just integrated. It's part of the image. So now when we select the pixels of that webcam shape and we delete it from the background, you can see that that stroke did not get added around this. So we're going to add the stroke separately. I'm sure there's a better way to do it than this, but this is really the only way that I know how. So we're going to come into the shape that we made for the webcam, double click that so we can bring up the layer style and click check on the stroke option. We can keep it as a gradient if you want to. I kind of like how that looks personally, so I'm just going to go ahead and click OK. So we have the stroke added. Before we rasterize this layer, we're going to right click on it and duplicate the layer. Okay, we have two different layers here, both with the stroke on them. We're going to want to delete the stroke effect from our original layer. So double click on it to bring up layer style and just uncheck the stroke box, click OK. And now we're going to right click rasterize that layer just to flatten it. Let's turn off the visibility of the copied layer that still has the stroke effect. It's cutting into the shape and we need the shape to be cut out. So if we try to cut out right now, it's going to delete that stroke too. So let's just double click in the copy and come into the stroke, and we're going to swap that position, we're going to swap that position from the inside to the outside. So it's cupped around the outside of the shape. And now when we turn off the visibility, you can see that that stroke is sitting snugly around the shape that we originally created. So what we can do here, we're going to right click on the copy and we're going to go ahead and rasterize that layer style so that it's flattened. And then we're going to Control select the thumbnail of the original layer that does not have the stroke. We're going to come up into layer 2 that still has the stroke, and we're going to delete that space. Then we're going to turn off the visibility of layer 2. We're going to hold Control, hit D for deselect, and now you can see that we have the outline remaining, but the shape itself is gone. There might be a better way to do that, but that's just how I've learned how to do it. So we can go ahead and delete layer 2, that's the shape of our webcam. And now you can see that we have our general shape that has gameplay, and we could fit a webcam spot down in there, but I'm just going to show you how that outline is showing up right now. Now we're going to add a little bit of frill or fluff to this, a little decoration if you wanted to. You can go again to pexels.com or pixabay.com, find you a shape. I just searched for crystals. I'm going to copy this image and bring it over. I'm going to hit Control V to paste. This is way too big right now, so we're going to go and edit, free transform. We're going to hold the shift button down to resize this and keep it in its proper dimensions. And we're going to make this fairly small because we just want this to be a little decoration that goes in the bottom corner over here. Maybe like right about there looks pretty good. So we're going to go ahead and click the checkbox in the top toolbar to say we're done. And then we're going to zoom in on this. I'm using the hand tool here to move the canvas over. We want to make these crystals transparent. So I'm going to use the pen tool, which is right here on the left toolbar. And you just select that. We're going to drop down fill at the top up here. We want this to be transparent so we can see what we're doing. If you don't change that fill type color and you start putting spots in, it's going to fill it up with a color like this. So you're not really going to be able to see the shape that you're cutting out. So make sure if you run into that problem, monochrome to just change that to transparent up there. So we're going to start outlining this. We don't have to be super perfect, but you can take this at whatever rate you want to. And we're just going to, you can see what I'm doing here. You just click at the different points and we're cutting. It's basically like, think of it like scissors, like you're cutting a straight line wherever you add that dot to. So we're just cutting out the shape. And when you get to the end, you want to click on the original starting point so you can close the shape out. And now that we have the full shape, you can see over here in our layers that it has created this shape 1 and it's the outline. So we're going to right click in the shape that we made and do make selection. Click OK on this window that pops up, and now it has selected the pixels of the shape we just traced. So next, instead of being selected on the shape 1 layer over here, we want to select the layer that's actually the image that we just cut out. There's 2 options here. You can either hit Control C to copy the pixels and Control V to paste as a new layer, where you're going to have to delete the original layer so that you do have the transparent image, or you can hold Shift, Control, and hit I, and this will invert your selection, and then hit delete, and it's going to delete everything except the pixels that we selected. And then hit Control D to deselect. I actually decided I don't like this little crystal, so let me erase that really quick. The eraser tool is over here on the left toolbar. So now we have our nice little crystals. We're going to just kind of position this nicely. If we want to change the rotation of it, we can use Edit, Transform, Rotate, and this is going to let us just kind of twist that around a little bit until it looks like the right angle. I'm gonna hit the check mark, say yes, I'm done. So now we have some little crystals on the bottom that give this a little bit of personality. So totally optional to do something like that. Now we want to create a section for our most recent follower, most recent subscriber. So we're going to again select this rectangle tool that we used at the start. You can either keep it square if you want to. We definitely want to go ahead and create a new layer for this. And we want to make sure we're going to turn off the fixed ratio, and we're just going to do free so that it's free to be any size or shape that it wants to be. You can keep it square if you want to and just kind of click and drag about the right shape. I'm going to make mine super round though, and we're going to click and drag this about like that. I want to fit 2 down here, so about that. I'm going to right click on the layer that I made and click duplicate to make 2. Use the move tool up here. I'm going to hold the shift button at the same time that I click and drag this, and that way it stays in the same line that I start moving in. So it's going to stay exactly parallel with this. And I'm going to just drag this around until it looks about right. So these are not the right color. You could have changed the color before you drew the shape, or I can come into these layers and select both. Click one layer and then hold the control button and click another one to select multiple or deselect. I'm going to go ahead and merge these into one layer because I want this effect to apply across both of them. I'm going to double click to bring up layer style. We're going to add a gradient overlay to this. We're going to mess around with these colors again. I'm going to try something like this. So we're going to go ahead and right click and rasterize this layer to finalize that gradient effect. And then we're going to change the blend of this layer onto the layer underneath it. We'll try soft light. So it makes it way too transparent. Just try darken. You want to make sure that whatever you select, text is able to show up on. That's the most important. We want it to match the look of our overlay, but we also want it to be opaque enough that text will stand out on top. So I actually think I like the look of screen the best, which is fairly subtle, so feel free to play around if you want. I'm going to add a stroke, double click on this, or I'm actually not going to do a gradient this time. We're going to turn off gradient. We're going to switch that back to color, and I'm going to change this blend mode so that it's not too crazy. Overlay looks all right. I'm going to add a drop shadow to this as well so they stand out a little bit more. I'm going to change the angle of that drop shadow. I'm going to mess with the distance, the spread, and the size of it until I'm satisfied with the look. So those pop out pretty decently. You can tell that they're there now. I'm going to click OK. We can go ahead and delete this shape that we made. We don't need it anymore. And I might actually want to add a stroke to my crystals as well, or my little flare. I'm going to make sure it's on normal. I'm going to add just a white stroke to this. Set this down to about 3 pixels. Maybe add a drop shadow. Drop shadow's all right, I'll keep it. Okay, so now we want to add our username over here in this section. So we're going to click the text tool. We're going to open up, make it really wide so that it'll fit. Okay, and we're going to have our streamer be called Cool Gamer Time, because why not? Up in this top toolbar, we're going to change the size. We're going to make it maybe about 100 pixels for now, and then we're going to drop down the font style and select a font that we like. Okay, I'm liking the look of Caveat, so we're going to change the size here because we can go a little bit bigger with this particular font, up to about 130, and this looks pretty decent to me. So now I want this to fit over here. I'm going to rotate this, so I'm just going to move my mouse around the outside until I see little rotates. I'm going to spin this around until it looks pretty much straight. We're going to click the checkbox for yes, we're satisfied. We're going to get the move tool and we're going to drag this around. So you can see here our font is too big. So we're going to come back into the text tool, click into this, select all of the font and drop the size down just a little bit. So I'm taking it down to about 116. Click check mark. Yes, we're satisfied, and then we drag this around until we like the positioning. I actually think I want to make this a little bit smaller because I want to show y'all something kind of fun I found. So we're going to add a new text layer here because there's a really fun web dings. So it's called Fredoka Dingbats, and it's all of these cute little animals. So we're just going to use the letter E for this little kitty cat. I'm going to bring the size up a tiny bit. We're going to rotate this so it's also going to be lined up over here, and we're going to move this over here. Now we have a really cute little kitty cat that goes along with our logo. We're going to change the blend option. You can either change the font style or the blend. So you can see that kitty cat kind of blends in a bunch now. I might move it around a little bit, move our title around. I'm going to also put that on overlay. It's impossible to see there, so I might just keep this on normal, come in, add a stroke to it, maybe a gradient overlay. The gradient overlay looks pretty nice, and maybe a little drop shadow since we've been so fond of drop shadows so far. And we'll click OK. So we have our username on this, we have our webcam cut out, our gameplay cut out. You can add any more elements to this if you want to, or play around with some of these techniques. But if you want to save this, you come up into the file. We want to export as a .png. If you save it as a JPG, it's not going to keep the transparency. So save this as a .png, and whenever you click save, it's going to download wherever your downloads folder is on your computer. And let me go ahead and add this so y'all can see what it looks like as an overlay. Okay, so here's the one that I made last night with the same technique, testing all of this out, and here's the one that I made with y'all today. So it's mostly the same. I just was in a pink mood today, I guess. But this is what this would look like once you have it all set up. The gameplay would obviously go up here, webcam would settle down here, and if you need to crop your webcam to fit in these dimensions, I can do an OBS tutorial on setting this stuff up if you want, but you're gonna want to hold Alt. Let me show you over here. I know it's crazy, but whenever you've got this, if you hold the Alt button while you're clicking and dragging, it will crop this so you can make sure that it fits in the dimensions of the webcam frame that you set up. And then we're all set. Now I'm staying where I'm supposed to. Okay, and that's gonna wrap it up for this overlay tutorial. Let me know if you have any questions below, or if you want me to go into more detail about any of the techniques, or if there's a specific type of overlay you'd like to see me create a tutorial on. And if you'd also like to see one that's just purely in Photoshop, I'd be happy to. I decided to go with Photopea today, a free resource, because I wanted it to be more accessible to people that might not be able to afford something like Adobe Photoshop. So yeah, if you like this video, leave a like, drop a subscribe, and I will talk to you guys in the next video. Bye!